immediately following this, perhaps. So I want to take a moment to make sure that everyone can hear. Can you please use the raise your hand button? It should be at the bottom of your Zoom, or type in that you can hear in the Q&A. Oh, looks like people can hear. That's perfect. So we will get started. I would like to start by acknowledging that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 nations, the Piikani, the Siksika, the Kainai, Stoney Nakoda, and Tsuut'ina First Nations. We acknowledge the ancestral territory of Siksika Sitapi, the Blackfoot Confederacy, and the home of the Métis Region Number 3. This project was funded by the Government of Canada's Sectoral Initiatives Program, and opinions shared in this webinar are Petrol MI's and do not necessarily reflect those of the Government of Canada. So to start, I am Breanne O'Reilly. I am the Program Manager here at Petrol MI, and I am here with Lisette Cameron, our analyst. The Petrol MI Division of Energy Safety Canada has a mandate to collaborate with industry, government, educators, and training agencies to support and advance the development of a sustainable and skilled and productive workforce. We specialize in providing oil and gas labor market data and insights, as well as resources for workforce and career planning. So I'm going to do a little poll now for you to find out a little bit more about who we have on the webinar today. While you're answering the poll, I'll tell you a little bit about what we're going through today. So we surveyed the Canadian energy industry employees to learn how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting work practices and productivity. More than 300 employed and unemployed energy workers from across Canada completed the survey in August and September. And in addition, we conducted interviews with 13 leaders from energy companies. So the series is divided into 4 parts. And the parts that we're going through today are part 1, focused on the labor cost reductions implemented by companies and how industry work practices and productivity have changed as energy workers and their employers have responded to the public health restrictions. And part 2 on how energy workers feel about returning to work and what actions employers can take to address workers' concerns. I will share this polling now. So you can see we have a split of some energy companies, some government, some training, some media, some nonprofit, some job seekers, and one other. There is the Q&A that you should see on your screen. So I do invite you to enter your questions as they arise during the presentation. We may answer some questions as we go if it's related to a specific chart or data point, but we will have some time at the end to answer hopefully all of your questions. So to get into things, I'm going to start by giving you a little overview on the demographics of who we interviewed or who we surveyed. So this is a little bit about where the organizations were for the employees that answered the survey. And so unsurprisingly, we were focused heavily in Western Canada, where most industry activity takes place, but we did achieve pretty good representation across the country. And we did get representation from all subsectors of the industry, with most coming from exploration and production and the oil field services side of things, which isn't surprising given that those are the 2 largest employers in the industry. We did hear from a range of small to large size companies. So we defined a small company as under 100 employees, a medium company as 101 to 500 employees, and over 500 is a large company. And you'll see most respondents came from that mid-size company range. We heard from a mix of head office and field workers. This actually pretty closely represents the 2016 census data, where 22% of the workforce didn't go to the same workplace location each day. And you can see here that 20% of our respondents were going to field locations. In addition, the age ranges that we heard from are very similar to our October labor force data. So the very close representation to what we see in the industry today. In addition, we heard from mostly full-time workers, which in the October labor force survey data, 97% of workers were full-time. So very similar. And you can see here the job families that we heard from. So business and operations support does include HR, communications and marketing, IT, accounting, legal. So it is a very large sector of the organization. So we're not surprised that we heard from a large number of those people. And now I will pass it over to Lisette to get into what we heard.
Thank you, Breanne. Welcome, everyone. We will just dive right into our key findings of part one, where we asked energy workers about working from home and their desire to work from home going forward. We'll talk about productivity and as well as the successes and challenges of working through the pandemic. So historically, the oil and gas industry has not typically been known for its flexible work policies, particularly the ability to work from home. And so it's not a huge surprise when we asked energy workers how often they worked from home prior to the pandemic, that about 7 in 10 said they never worked from home. And only 8% said they worked from home 5 or more days a week, which from now on, I'm going to refer to as full-time. So 5 days per week or more will be referred to as full-time. And we do see a difference by company size. 3/4 of those from medium-sized companies said they never worked from home pre-COVID, compared to 2/3 of those from small or large sized companies. Then when COVID hit and things quickly changed once the various public health measures were put in place across the country starting in March, and initially we saw 70% of energy workers were forced to work from home at least 1 day a week, with 57% or nearly 6 in 10 working full-time remotely. And if we take a closer look by company size, the larger the company, the greater the proportion of people working from home full-time. It was 61% for large size firms compared to 47% for small size firms. So what about going forward? Well, several months into the pandemic, once workers had settled into the work from home experience, we were interested in knowing, in an ideal world, how often would they like to work from home in the future? What we found was 69% of respondents, or about 7 in 10, said they would like to work from home at least some of the time. Now recall on the previous slide that 71% of respondents said they never worked from home prior to the pandemic. The most popular choices were 2 to 3 days a week, followed by 1 day a week. On the other hand, about 3 in 10 workers said they had no desire to work remotely any amount of time going forward. If we look at these results by age, we do see some differences, with younger workers, those under the age of 35, having the highest proportion of those wanting to work from home at least some of the time, and that was 75%. We were also interested in employer perspectives. Breanne had mentioned we have spoken to 13 leaders from energy companies, and we asked them if COVID-19 had prompted their companies to consider changing or accelerating their remote working policies or philosophies. And while we did get a couple of no answers, I would say the overall theme was one of surprise that the transition to working from home went so well. And many companies are looking at more flexible work from home policies. I'd like to pause for a moment and we will ask a question of the audience. What would be your ideal amount of time working from home?
Right, I will close the poll here. Share the results. 5 days a week and the 3 days a week are the winners. No one wants to go to the office full time. Hopefully your employers agree.
Okay. So the sudden shift to remote working doesn't appear to have had a significant net negative impact on energy workers' productivity, at least so far. About half of respondents said their productivity remained the same relative to their pre-COVID work situation, while 36% said their productivity improved. Only 16% of workers said they were less productive. We do see some interesting differences when we compare the various age groups. The 35 to 44 age group had the highest proportion of those saying they are more productive at 50%. The 55 and older age group had the highest proportion of those saying their productivity stayed the same at 65%. And the 45 to 54 age group had the highest proportion of those saying they were less productive at 25%. So the good news is that 85% of the energy workers surveyed believe they are as or more productive working from home than in their usual workplace. And managers tended to agree. If we take a look at the chart on your right, when managers were asked to rate their team's productivity compared to their pre-COVID work situation, 68%, or about 7 in 10 managers, said their teams were as or more productive working from home. I want to take another pause for another poll, and the question is, how productive have you been working from home relative to your pre-COVID work situation?
I always appreciate the honesty of the productivity questions.
Absolutely. Some days are better than others,
Yes.
I think, for the most part.
Okay. Share the results here. So it looks like most people were much more productive, somewhat more productive, or stayed the same. Oh, we do have a question about managing childcare or home responsibilities having an impact on those who said their productivity decreased.
What was interesting is I had said the 35 to 44 age group had the highest proportion saying they are more productive. And that really struck me as interesting because generally that is the age group that has more younger children at home. And so when I dug a little bit deeper in, I noticed that some of the comments included some clarification around that. And it was initially when public health restrictions were put in place, people said they were definitely less productive when they had to manage their children at home. And so there was clarification that once childcare issues had been resolved or their children had gone back to school or daycare, that's when they found they were much more productive. The energy workers we surveyed identified several factors that have helped them to work successfully through the pandemic. The top factors included being provided with computer hardware so they could work from home, the company executing a crisis plan effectively, regular meeting and communications with team members, strong corporate leadership, strong corporate communication, and IT support. Then when asked about any barriers or challenges that prevented them from working successfully at home, surprisingly, just over half said there were no barriers or challenges. And of those that did indicate a challenge, the top one was limited or no regular contact with project teams and management, followed by a lack of dedicated workspace in their home. We do see some differences by company size. Respondents from medium-sized companies had the highest proportion, saying they had no barriers or challenges at 57%, while only 44% of those from small-sized companies said they had no challenges. So in part 2 of our survey, we explored how energy workers feel about returning to work and what actions employers are taking to address their workers' concerns and ensure their safety. So at the time of the survey, again, that was in late August and early September, energy workers were trickling back to the workplace. At that time, 47% of energy workers were working from home at least one day a week, and 31% were working from home full time. Again, we do see some differences by company size. About a third of respondents from medium and large firms were still working from home full time, compared to 17% of workers from small-sized companies. One of the questions I think is on the mind of many is how much office space are companies going to need going forward if they change their work from home policies? So we asked leaders from the energy companies if their need for physical space has shifted, and longer term, are they considering eliminating workplace locations or reducing their real estate footprint? And while some companies are not considering adjusting their real estate in the near future, it is something that many leaders will be considering. And here are a few interesting comments that we gathered. One company said that the pandemic had really made them question their office space and whether they needed it at all. They used to think people couldn't work from home. Another company said they envision maintaining their office space. They believe bringing people together is really important for their culture. And again, another one said, yes, we may not need the size of space that we have now if we can get a formal work policy approved. So really interesting comments here. And I would encourage you, if you're interested, there's many more comments that add context to our report. So I would encourage you to take a look at our report for more comments there. So returning to the physical workplace during the during the pandemic continues to be a critical discussion. And many employers may be wondering if their employees, particularly those working in the office setting, are ready to return to the workplace. When asked, energy workers in late August and September, 66% said they were comfortable returning to the workplace, and 24% said they were uncomfortable. There were certainly some differences depending on the size of the company that the respondent worked for. If we look at those that were comfortable returning to the workplace, 77% of those from small companies said they were comfortable, compared to 53% of those from large companies. On the flip side, if we look at those that were uncomfortable, 31% of those from large companies were uncomfortable returning to their workplace, compared to 18% of those from small companies. And then when we asked about comfort levels resuming other business-related activities, results showed that energy workers were most comfortable visiting their company's field locations and facilities, as well as visiting field locations operated by customers or third parties. And they were least comfortable taking business-related flights, as well as attending conferences or in-person events. And so I'd like to pause again for a moment, and the question we would like to pose is, what is your comfort level with returning to the workplace, number one? And number two, what is your comfort level with attending conferences or in-person events?
While you guys answer those two questions, we did have a question about the real estate piece and whether the objective of the data collection was to see a trend in the real estate impact of the oil and gas workspace future. So I'd say we were generally curious. It was something that came up a few times while we were coming up with our survey questions of if, and especially with more remote happening. But as far as scope goes, we're not really in the real estate business. So I'd suggest taking a look at maybe the real estate board may have some answers for that trend going forward. But that wouldn't be us. Okay. Almost everyone has responded to the poll. People are, at this point, somewhat uncomfortable with returning to the workspace, which isn't surprising given the different COVID numbers right now than they were when we ran this survey. And attending events is very uncomfortable, is 40%. And surprisingly, the next one is somewhat comfortable and very comfortable at 25 and 20%. So that's interesting. Okay. So as the lockdown restrictions eased over the summer and workers began their return back to their workplace, we asked energy workers what were their greatest concerns about the return to work. And 83% of respondents said that they had at least one concern about their return to work. And as you can see, the top concerns were the possibility of a second wave of the pandemic, exposure to other employees, concerns over job security if conditions don't improve, and exposure to visitors at the workplace. Now, while 27% of the energy workers said no changes were required by their companies to support their return to the workplace,
The majority of respondents, about 7 in 10, believe that some changes were required. And so the top changes mentioned included clear instructions on what will happen if there's a second wave, flexibility in work schedules, limited or no visitor policies at their workplaces, and limited face-to-face meetings of employees. And our final slide talks about employee surveys, focus groups, and even informal feedback. These tools are valuable opportunities for workers to provide feedback to their companies. And what we found was just under half, so 48% of respondents said their company had conducted internal surveys, interviews, or focus groups to understand their feelings about their return to the workplace. And the employers that we interviewed also agreed that addressing workers' concerns was especially important during these times. One company said they are continually conducting informal benchmarks with other companies in their industry through the industry associations that they belong to. And another said that they started an online community where employees could ask questions daily at first when the pandemic began. So again, there's lots of feedback from employers in the report that is interesting, that I encourage you to take a look at. And with that, I will now pass it back to Breanne.
So that was just a brief overview of parts 1 and 2. I do encourage you to take a look at the full report, as Lisette said, if you're interested, as the report has many more employer comments and some additional context for the charts. As well, stay tuned for parts 3 and 4. They're being released on Monday and Wednesday next week. Part 3 focuses on the skills and training workers believe are in demand. It also looks at whether workers have been seeking employment in different subsectors or industries. And part 4 focuses on the unemployed and temporarily laid off workers. It explores what their job search and training activities what training activities they've been engaged in, including potential plans should they not be called back to work or be able to find other work. You can follow us on social media by searching PetroLMI on Twitter and LinkedIn, or Careers in Oil and Gas on Facebook and on YouTube, where you would find this live recording. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at the bottom of our website to be the first to know about any upcoming reports and releases. Next Friday's webinar will be at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, a little bit earlier than today. And we will be going live next Friday as well and recording and sharing it after the presentation. So if you miss it, you can check it out after the fact. And I will open it up for questions and run our final poll. Oh, I should also add, if there are any specific data requests, if you'd like to know the breakdown for only mid-sized companies or for a specific sector of the industry, or you have a specific interest in an age group for one of the questions, you can email us to request that data, and we are happy to help you. That's why our email addresses are included on that slide there. Will the slide deck be shared? So as I've said, the recording will be shared. I can send the PowerPoint slides out. Sure, if you want to email me, I can definitely do that. But yeah, the full recording will be shared on our website and on YouTube. Did we ask if the scope or importance of people's work changed after the pandemic? So we did ask about if roles shifted and if workload changed. I think that is in part 3.
I think so, yes.
They're starting to merge together in my brain, but I think that is part of the part 3 findings. So that will be released Monday morning if you want to take a look at that. And then, is there a survey summary on jobs and job situations impacted? So we have an ongoing labor supply survey that will be releasing some findings on possibly in December, if not early in the new year. And that does focus on how people's roles have changed pre-COVID and post-COVID. It's targeting underemployed and unemployed workers. But as for overall jobs impacted, we did ask if any labor cost reductions were put into place in part 1.
We also, in part 4 coming up, we surveyed unemployed and temporarily laid off workers, and we do have the demographics of that group that will accompany part 4. So
yeah. So as for the labor cost reductions, we did hear that 37% of companies had permanent layoffs, 35% had a hiring freeze, 29% had reduced executive pay, 28% reduced worker pay, 27% did temporary layoffs. So there is that information in part 1 of the report as well. Sure, if for the companies contemplating a permanent shift towards working from home, will there be adjustments to salaries? We didn't hear that from employers that they would be changing salaries at all. And not very many, or potentially even any of the companies, said they would be working from home full-time permanently. One mentioned that they might consider it, but at this point, no one was saying 100% that they would be they would be fully remote from now on. I think for a lot of companies in oil and gas, that would be challenging. Right. Looks like we've answered all the questions. If anyone has any future questions, our emails are available there. And we hope you can join us next Friday for the webinar at 11 a.m. that we'll be getting into those skills questions, as well as the unemployed or temporarily laid off workers. And otherwise, I invite you all to download the parts 1 and 2 from our website at careersinoilandgas.com, and hopefully that answers some more of your questions. Thanks so much for joining us today.
thanks, everyone.